Okay, so now what I'd like to talk about are these things called membranes and fascia. And this is where you are going to have a combination of epithelial and connective tissue that work together for a specific function. So again, let's move to the notes packets, and it asks you to define a membrane. And in the context I'm going to define it as, I'm just going to define it as a barrier. Now, we've talked about membranes that line body surfaces, and we've also talked that membranes that form the boundary of the cell. And so what's the difference? Well, the main difference is that a cell, we're just talking about the cellular level. Okay, so cellular level, that's the plasma membrane, and it's going to be a barrier for the cell. It lets some things through into the cell and keeps others out. The difference for the type of membranes that we're about to talk about, okay, these types of membranes, is they're going to be tissue membranes. And so they're composed of epithelial and connective tissue, and they form a barrier for other tissues that are underneath. Okay. And so what we're going to find is that there's actually 4 different types of membranes. And if you look in your book, you should also have this figure, okay? And this is just showing the different membrane types, okay? So we have mucous membranes, and here's your surface. We have serous membranes, again, here's the surface. Cutaneous membranes, surface is at the top. Synovial membranes are a little bit different. This is showing a joint, so a joint is any place where you have 2 bones connecting together, and so the synovial membrane is going to line the outside of that connection. So it's going to go around in 3 dimensions, and so this is the synovial membrane, and here would be inside the joint cavity, and here would be outside the joint cavity. So it's really more of a lining for that joint cavity. So what you need to do is you need to look through this, and you need to look for what are the layers of tissues going from superficial, so superficial would be near the surface, down to the deeper tissue underneath. Okay, so let's look at some of this. So for mucous membranes, our most superficial tissue is going to be some sort of epithelium, okay? Generally it's going to be a simple epithelium, and then underneath we have what's called the lamina propria. And this is going to be made up of areolar connective tissue. Okay, so those are the 2 layers, but keep in mind we've got the specific name if it's found in a mucous membrane. We're going to find this in the digestive system, the respiratory system, the reproductive system, the urinary system, and the big thing that they're going to do is they're going to, just like the name would imply, they secrete mucus. And that's actually going to be very important for moving things along the tubing. For the respiratory system, that mucus traps particles, and your body moves that mucus out of your lungs, so it actually helps clean your lungs. It can reduce friction. It can be important for all sorts of different reasons. Now, the serous membranes, it is going to have a mesothelium, and that is going to be the simple squamous epithelium. We're only going to find this in the ventral body cavities, okay? And specifically we're going to have pleura that's going to line the lungs. We're going to have the pericardium that's going to line the heart. And then we're going to have the peritoneum, which is going to, oops, let's spell that, peritoneum, which is going to line the abdominal cavity. Okay, so we start off with a simple squamous epithelium called a mesothelium, and then underneath we're going to have areolar tissue. Okay. And the purpose of this type of membrane is that it secretes what's called serous fluid. And this is a very thin, watery fluid that prevents friction. So you can imagine if you've got this layer around your lungs and it's secreting that fluid, then as your lungs might be moving a little bit past other organs, other vessels, other tissues there, that fluid helps to lubricate it, helps prevent friction, help prevent sticking of your lungs to other things, and so that allows you to freely move. Cutaneous membranes, that is going to be the same thing as the skin. Okay, so anytime you see cutaneous membrane, immediately you can think skin. This is going to be a thicker sort of membrane. It's going to be waterproof, and it is going to be dry. Okay. And so the types of tissues that we find: keratinized, stratified, squamous, epithelium. Keratin is going to be the waterproofing molecule. So that's going to be most superficial. Then we're going to have a layer of areolar tissue, and then underneath that we're going to have dense irregular connective tissue. Okay. One thing I want to do say up here, the mucous membranes, the epithelium, it can be simple layers such as lining your digestive tract, but if you think about it, on our mouth, the outside is dry, so that's skin, that's cutaneous, but you go inside, and that's actually a mucous membrane because it's wet. And there, because that membrane is subject to so much abrasion, it's actually going to be a stratified epithelium. So this epithelium for mucous membranes can be simple or stratified. Okay, so synovial membranes, we're going to find those around movable joints. They help encase that joint cavity. They are going to make synovial fluid and keep it at the joints. And what synovial fluid does is it provides lubrication and cushion for the joints, so that those bones that are right next to each other, they don't knock on each other and damage tissue and cause pain. So the most superficial layer there is going to be the fibrous capsule. And then we're going to have a layer of areolar tissue, and then we're going to have a layer of epithelium. It's a modified epithelium, and this is going to be the thing that secretes the synovial fluid. So those are some of the different types of membranes, and again, here's the visual of it so you can see surface, the epithelium, the lamina propria, which is areolar tissue underneath. Again, here would be the inside of the body cavity. The liquid layer is that serous fluid that's secreted. Here we've got that simple squamous epithelium, the mesothelium, and underneath areolar tissue. And then deep here would actually be the lung or the heart or something of that nature. Cutaneous membrane, this would be the air above your skin. This is the thick epithelium that has that waterproofing molecule. Then we've got areolar tissue, and then underneath that dense irregular connective tissue that helps give your skin a lot of strength to have that dense irregular connective tissue. And again, here's bone number 1, bone number 2. In between is a whole bunch of fluid. This membrane, the synovial membrane, secretes that fluid and then keeps it at that joint location so it can be a cushion and a lubricant for the joint. So we've talked about membranes, but then let's also talk about this thing called fascia. Now, unlike membranes, fascia only consists of connective tissue rather than connective and epithelial tissue. And this is their function. Their function is going to be to wrap around internal organs and structures, and they provide strength and stability. And through that, they're going to maintain that position of those internal structures. So there's 3 different types of fascia. And so let's look at this with this slide. Okay, so just to orient you, this would be a chunk of skin, okay, and so right over on this side is going to be the surface, the air above your skin, and then over on this side is going to be the body cavity, so this would be where all your organs would be located over here. So this is called the body wall. It's that big chunk of tissue, including the skin, that's going to be separating the outside from all of your internal organs. Okay. So we start with the skin, okay, and then the first thing we're going to run into is we're going to run into this thing called the superficial fascia. Now you can see from all of the yellow blobs there that it's got a lot of adipose tissue. We're also going to find a lot of areolar tissue there. Sometimes you may also hear it called the hypodermis or the subcutaneous layer, sub meaning underneath the cutaneous or underneath the skin. Okay. Then right next to that we're going to have what's called the deep fascia. The deep fascia is going to be dense irregular connective tissue, and the red here is showing muscle. Okay, so you can have several layers of deep fascia that's going to be surrounding and encasing and separating some of these different muscles. You might find a number of different muscles between the skin and that cavity. Then finally what you're going to have is you're going to have the deepest fascia, which is the subserous fascia. Okay, this is only areolar tissue, so it's very thin. It's a loose connective tissue. And what we would next find right next to it is actually going to be that serous membrane and then the body organs. And so this is the organization of the body wall, and specifically the fascia within that body wall. So you have some different activities to help you become familiar with these different fascia. I point out here too, if we're looking at this chart, the specific type of tissue, well, we're going to have areolar and adipose tissue. For the deep, it's going to be dense, irregular connective tissue. For the subserous fascia, it's going to be areolar connective tissue. And then you should just know which most is superficial. The deep fascia is going to be located surrounding muscles. It turns out that the deep fascia is all, it's going to be continuous with a lot of other connective tissue structures that you might find near the muscles. And the subserous fascia is going to be right superficial to the serous membrane. And so those are the different types of membranes and fascia that you will find in the body.